Hey guys, how's it going? I'm back here with another video, and today we're going to be bringing the next episode of this series where I teach you guys how to build a React full stack application using, again, React, Node, and MySQL. And in the previous video, we were able to implement some sort of system where we're able to comment on different posts. So you can see we have here a post. There are the comments to our right over here. But if we go to the home page and we go to another post, such as this one, the comments are different because we commented on this one different posts, right? So basically, this is basically done. And right now, I want to take this series to another part, which is basically implementing some sort of registration login system, because a lot of you guys been requesting me that. And if we're going to implement more stuff like liking posts or that kind of stuff, then we definitely need to have some sort of authentication or registration system, because we want to know which user you are, right? So that's basically what we're going to be starting in this video. And again, I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm going to be posting 2 to 3 times a week this week. I always post 3 times a week. However, during the past week, it's been hard because of finals, and I still have finals this week. But after that, it's going to be over, and I'm going to be posting almost every day because I'll have a lot more time to do so. So before we get into the video, if you guys can leave a like and subscribe if you're not subscribed, I would massively appreciate that because it will help push my videos to more people. And yeah, that's basically it. Let's get into the tutorial. So what exactly do we want to do right now? Well, we want to start by implementing some sort of system that will allow us to register, right? And I usually like to start with the backend first because it just gets us it just makes us understand what we're doing, right? So in order to do that, we're gonna have to create some sort of table that is going to hold which user you are, right? So we're gonna have a table for users, and in order to do that, I'm just gonna stop my server from running because I don't want to be making changes to our database with our server running. So what we have to do first is we have to create a model called user or users.js. And inside of here, I'm just gonna copy like the code that we had from other models, just so we already have a base for it. However, we're gonna make some major changes over here. First of all, this has to be called users, and this will be called users as well. This is the name of the table in the database, and down here we're gonna return users. Right now, I don't wanna associate anything, so I'll just comment this out. And over here, we have to think about what we wanna what columns, what we wanna add for each user, right? So, for example, if you guys recall, in our post ID or in our post table, we have a username. So somewhere here we need some sort of username. So to keep things simple, what I'm thinking is all you need is a username and a password, at least for now. So how we do that is basically I'm going to come over here. I'm just going to allow the username column, and I'm going to create another column called password, like this, password. And both of them are going to be strings, and allow no will be false. So basically, when you create a user, you must define a username for them and a password. And since we're doing some sort of registration and authentication, the password won't appear as a string, it will be hashed, and I'll show you guys how to do that in this video. Why are we doing this? Because, for example, when we have a post like this, we need to, if you're not logged in, if you're not a user, then you can just, and there's a like system, you can like a post similar to Facebook. Basically, you can just like how many times you want, right? Because there's no way to know if you are a person who already liked that post. So that's why we're adding this sort of registration system. And it will also help you guys a lot because this is used in many different applications. So what I want to do is, for now, I think this is already good enough for the purposes of our project. Just a user table, which each user will have a username and a password. So now let's look at this. When we created a post, we created an association between posts and comments, right? Because it makes sense, right? We want to, for each comment, each comment must have some sort of association to a post in which that comment was made in, right? So we said that for our posts model, we want to associate it and say that each post has many comments. So for the users model, we're going to do something very similar. However, we're going to do it for the post. So for example, we're going to say users.associate. Then we're going to grab the models. And then we want to say that each user has many posts. And let's think about this. This makes sense because each user can post how many times they want. So this is basically what we're doing. And when this is done over here, what it should do is it should create some sort of how can I say, some sort of column in the posts table, which will include the ID and like the ID for the user. And right now that might kind of like mess things up for our posts. However, let's not worry about that right now. If the project is kind of messed up in regards to that, we're going to deal with that 100% later, because right now we're just going to focus on the users, creating the user and its interface, right? So I'm going to run my server so that it will make all the changes to our database. And let's open up MySQL Workbench. You can see right here. Let's check to see if a table is automatically created. If I refresh it, you can see the users table is over here, and let's select it to see if it, yeah, you can see there's an ID, a username, a password, a created ad, and an updated ad. So our table is beautifully done, and let's check to see if the changes were made to the posts. Maybe they weren't, which would be great for now. Yeah, I guess they weren't. There's no changes here, which is great because that means that we don't have to care that much right now about this, but later on we'll have to delete our whole posts table and create a new one just so that the association is in place. So what do we do right now? We created our table over here and we have our users. We want to be able to create users into our project. So we want to create a new route into our application called users. So users.js. Let's create one over here. And this route will be very similar to all the other routes we have. I'm just going to copy the code we wrote for the other ones and paste it over here. However, we're going to change some stuff. For example, the model we're going to be dealing with is the users model, obviously, because we're going to be changing the users table. And let's think about this. What kind of endpoints do we want to have in our application? Well, the main one we want to have is we want to have some sort of post request that is going to insert elements into our users table, right? Because it's basically registration. We can call it registration. So what I want to do is I want to create a post request. And this will be to the empty slash as well. And inside of here, we're going to write all the logic regarding the registration to our project. So right before we do this, we actually have to apply this route to our application, similar to what we did with all the other routes. So I'm going to open up here the index.js, and I'm just going to copy this code over here and apply the users route so that it actually works. So I'm going to say users router, and I'm going to grab obviously the users .js file, and then just apply this over here. And let's call this the auth routes. So instead of being like /comments or /posts, we're gonna make an endpoint, like we're gonna make a request to the /auth route. So this is our router working. So let's come to the users.js, and over here we're gonna write the logic for registering a user to our database. So how are we going to get the data for a user? For example, we're gonna have in our React application, we're gonna have some sort of form that you can input like a username and a password, and we should get that data through a request, which the data is going to be sent through the body. So let's get that data. Let's assume that when we make the request, we're gonna send a JSON containing a username and a password. So all we have to do is we can just come over here and do something like this, react.body, and we can just grab the username and password. By the way, and previously all we did was we just created a variable and set it equal to react.body. So why are we doing this right here? Well, because we assumed that whenever we make this request, we're going to be sending an object containing a username and a password. So we can do this right here. And all it's doing is we're just destructuring the object. We're grabbing the username individually and the password individually. And the reason why we want to do that is because we want to make some changes to the password. And you guys will see exactly what I mean by that. So to do that, what we have to do is we need to actually install a library in our backend. So I'm going to open up here a new terminal just so you guys can see it. We're going to navigate towards the server folder like this. You can see we're inside of the server folder. And now I just want to install a very famous library called bcrypt. And this library allows us to hash like strings. And what I mean by hash is, think about it this way. We want to have an application which stores passwords. However, we obviously don't want to store like the password that the user created. Imagine my password is, I don't know, dog123. I don't want to store that into the table, because if anyone, like for some reason, have access to that table, we don't want them to see our password. So what we do is we actually get the password, we put it inside of an algorithm that hashes that password. It basically just scrambles it around, and it turns into a random string of letters and numbers, right? And you might be thinking, okay, so if someone found that, all they have to do is just put that string again in the algorithm, and it should return the original string, right? No, because basically hashing is a one-way function. What happens is you put the password there, and it just hashes to another value, and you can never like know the original password just from that value. All you can do is you can hash a string again and compare the hashed values to see if they were the same strings. And that's what we're doing over here. Since we just installed bcrypt, all we have to do is we have to come over here at the top, and I'm gonna import bcrypt from let me just require from bcrypt like this. And this library will allow us to implement those hashing functions. So for example, we have the password over here, and we want to basically just grab this password, and we're going to call bcrypt like this. Then we're going to say bcrypt.hash like this, and then we're going to grab the password and pass some sort of this is called salt rounds, which basically means like how long it's gonna take to calculate this. It's just a value. I believe the higher this is, the more hashed or the more scrambled the password is. But I wouldn't worry. I've always used 10 as the value over here, so that's what I recommend. And basically what we're doing over here is we're passing the original password you sent. So again, with that example, if my password was dog123, this is what we're passing over here, and we're saying bcrypt to hash this. And then what we can do is we can cache this in a promise and grab the result, the hashed result, through this argument over here called hash. And now we can see that this is what we should be returning. This is what we should be. This should be the hashed password. So now that we have that value, all we have to do is we have to tell our model, our user's model, to add this new user to our database. So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna say users.create like this, and we're gonna pass an object inside of here, and that object will be the object containing the user, right? So it's just gonna have two different properties, a username and a password. So for the username, all we're gonna pass is we're gonna pass the actual username that the user passed in the body, right? But for the password, instead of passing the original password, we're gonna pass the hash value like this, because now we're gonna store the hashed value in our table. So when this is done, we can just wait for this to, like, we can just return something. We can just say something like this, res.json, I don't know, success. And this should be done, right? So this is very simple logic. We're just creating everything and adding it to our table. So we can check to see if this is working. I'm gonna open up Insomnia. And now that we have Insomnia opened up, we just want to create a new request over here, and let's call it register user, something like this. And it's going to be a post request, right? So let's come over here and say post, and let's say that the body will be a format JSON. So the request URL we're going to put is we're going to put localhost 2001/auth, because that's what we made. And the JSON will basically just be some username. So username, and let's call this PedroTech. So let's create the first user. It's going to be called PedroTech, and the password will be some sort of value. So I'm going to say password 123. Not a good password, but that's basically it. We're just adding this user to our table. Right now in our MySQL workbench, if I grab the users table, you can see there's nothing inside of it. But if I make this request, what should happen is it should return success. And in our table, if I refresh it, you can see we have a new user, and you can see that our password is hashed. It's not password 123. It's just a random, just a random huge string, which means it's secure in some sort of way. We're not able to see the password that I wrote originally. So our endpoint is working, and that is really good. But this is not all done, because we need to do something in regards to the login, right? Because we created some sort of route for registration, but now the most important thing we want to do is we want to create a route for login. So we're going to come over here, and we're just going to create another request. Let's call it router.post. I'm going to make it a post request as well, but it's going to be the login route. So I'm going to call this login. I know this one I called it just a simple slash, but let's call this login just to differentiate. And again, it's going to be an async function, and we're going to grab a rec, a res, and over here we're just going to open up our function. So the first thing we want to do is we want to grab the username and password again. So I'm going to say const username, similar to what we did above. So username and password, because we want to have access to both of them, because we're going to be manipulating both of them. So rec.body. So now that we have grabbed the username, what we want to do is we want to, first of all, when you're trying to log in, you're going to put there's going to be a form, like two inputs, for example, one wanting you to input the username and one wanting you to input the password, right? So the first thing we have to do is just ask to see if that username actually exists in our table, because if you're trying to log in with a username that doesn't exist, then we're not gonna, like, it's not gonna work. So we need to make that check first. So to do that, it's very simple. Since this function is asynchronous, we want to grab the user, and just say, okay, we're going to grab user equals to await, and then we're going to use the users model to say users.find1, because there's always going to be only one user, and this function will only grab the user depending on what we pass over here. So what I want to do is I want to say, okay, I want to grab the user where. So we can use this functionality that I showed you guys previously. So where, and we can pass where the username is equal to the username that we are passing over here. So the logic for this is we're telling Sequelize to go to the users table, find only one user where the username column in the table is equal to the username that the person is trying to log in. If there is no user with that username, then this will be empty. But if there is, then this will populate with the values for that user. So why is this beautiful? Because now what we can do is we can make a really quick check to see if that user actually exists. If it doesn't return anything, meaning if the user is not in the table, then it's just gonna, this will be satisfied. So not user will be satisfied. And we can say res.json, and we can pass some sort of like object saying error. Let's say user doesn't exist, something like this, and basically we're just returning an error instead of continuing forward. But if this isn't satisfied, if the user exists, then now we have to write some code to compare the password that the user inputted in the while trying to log in with the password in our table. So to do that, we're going to be using bcrypt again. And if you recall, I mentioned that you can't unhash a password. So I couldn't just get this password over here and pass it to a function or pass it on bcrypt, and it should return password123, which was the password we passed to create this. But what we can do is we can hash password123 again, and the result will be exactly like this, which means that we can compare these two strings to see if they are the same. So what we're doing here is we're going to be using this function from bcrypt. So we're going to use bcrypt, and it's called compare, and it will basically take two values. The first is the password you are inputting, for example, let's say the password that someone is using to try to log in, and the password that the user has in the database. So that password would be user.password, because remember we grabbed the user from the database from the table over here, and if we say user.password, we're just getting the password from the user that exists in the table. And now we're just comparing this, the password you're trying to log in, to that password over there. So what we do is we say, okay, .then, and over here we can just grab a variable as arguments to this function, and we can call it whatever we want. I'm going to call it match, because basically this represents if it's true, it means it's the passwords are the same. If it's false, it means they aren't the same. So we can directly just say, okay, if not match, then we want to return some sort of error. So we want to say res.json, let's pass an error again and say something like wrong username and password combination. It's just that you try to log in with a username that exists, but the password is wrong. So that's the basic idea. But then if this continues moving forward, because this they actually matched and match isn't false, then we want to write the code for login. So here's the beautiful part. Right now, let's just test to see if all of this is working. Let's say rest.json and say something like you logged in. And let's test to see if this is working. So in our table, you can see we only have one user, which is PedroTech. Now, if we go to Insomnia and we create another route, another request over here called, let's call it login user, and it's a post request, and the body is JSON. We click create. We're just gonna copy the same link we have over here, but instead of being just /auth, it's gonna be /auth/login. And the JSON will be the same as the one for register, because when you're trying to log in, you need to pass a username and a password. So let's test all the possibilities. Let's first test trying to put someone that doesn't exist. So there's no user called PedroTech without an H at the end. So if we click send, you should see it says user does not exist. Now let's try to send a user that exists, but the password is wrong. So let's just pass the password which isn't the password for PedroTech. It should say error, wrong username. Oh, I accidentally got out of there, but it says wrong username and password combination. But if we pass password 123, it should say logged in, which means it is working perfectly, and we're able to make all that checks to see if we're actually logged in or not. Now, there are many things that we can do. For example, what I plan to do is I plan to add some sort of authentication system where it's going to obviously persist and allow us to continue logged in. And however, before we actually do that, I want to start implementing the front end for our login and registration, just so that we're able to organize everything and be able to have a visual representation of what's happening. So what I'm going to do is, in this video, I'm going to continue it by stop working with the server and just start working with React, so that we're able to have that visual representation. And in the next video, we can implement all the rest, the rest of the authentication and registration process, but now with some sort of representation, so that we can see what we're doing. So right now what we want to do is we want to come to our React application, and let's open over here. You can see that we have a navbar at the top where there's many links, right? So technically what I want to do is I want to create another link for like registration, right? So we're going to keep it simple. Inside of our app.js, we're going to add a new link over here called, two links actually, called login and registration. I am aware that like normal websites don't have those links always at the top, and if you guys want to see, like for example, when you log in, automatically the links will disappear. I can do that very easily, so if you guys are interested in seeing that, just let me know. But let's change this to registration. But the thing is, right now we want to be able to just write the simplest version as possible, so that we can just have everything functionally running. So let's make this into a registration, and you can see that now at the top we have both links over here, right? Was there any issues with the API? Let me just take a look. Let me just run this again. Yeah, everything is fine. But yeah, you can see we have our... No, actually there's some errors with the... Oh, the error right now is the fact that now we have a user ID as part of the table. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to come to our server, and in our models, I'm going to remove the association that we created. Just for now, I'm going to comment this out so that it doesn't give us any errors. I'm going to save this, and you'll see that now if I refresh my page over here, it should work. Yeah, you can see it's working. It's perfect now. So let's close this right here, and this as well. And now let's just create the components that are going to represent the login page and the registration page. So both of them are going to be very simple. Let's just create login.js. So login.js and registration.js over here. And what happens is, let me just also close this. Okay, so both of them, we're going to create a component. So rfce and rfce. And inside of them, actually before we work in them, we're just gonna import both of them over here, so that we can actually create a route for both of them. So let's import the registration route from pages and registration, and let's import the login route as well from the pages folder and the login file. And now we just create both components like this. Let's just come over here and let's change this to be /registration. And for the registration, we want to render the component called registration, and for the login, we want to render the component login. So very simple. We're just going to say login over here. And you can see that if I write here in my login component, I just write login, and for my registration component, I just write registration. You can see that now in our application, if we go to the login, it should say login. If we go to the registration, it should say registration. So our routes are working, and that's awesome, right? So what we want to do now is we want to be able to add the forms into both of them so that we implement the API requests that we created previously in this video. So the first one we're going to do is the registration one. So for the registration, we can do it in many ways. I'm thinking that we can use the same format as we did with the create post component. As you can see, we used Formic and Yup to do some form validation, and since we already have all the code written, we already did this, it's going to be very fast. It took a long time the first time we did it because I went over everything, but now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy most of the code we wrote in order to make this go a lot faster. So for example, let's copy the import statements here at the top, and let's just paste them over here. And the reason why I want to use Formic for registration is because, again, there's some stuff. For example, our username needs to be between 3 and 15 characters. That's something that we made, right? So I need to validate if the user is putting the correct information. So instead of this component, let's also copy the initial values and the validation schema and just change their values over here. Initial values, for example, there's only going to be username and password, so let's just pass both of them. And if you're confused on what we're doing, the third or fourth episode of the series goes in detail about everything we're doing right now. So basically, we're just creating our form validation system using a library called Formic. And for the validation schema, it's going to be a bit different. The username is going to be exactly the same. It's going to be a string, and it has to be between 3 and 15 characters. Then at the bottom, we're also going to add the password. And the password, we can do something very similar. It will be a string, and we can say that it's going to be from, I don't know, at least 4, and maximum, like, let's say 20. That makes sense, right? And it's also required. So both of them are required, and they just have like different character limits. So let's copy the rest. For example, we want to copy the whole form just so that we are able to use Formic. However, we're going to change it a bit. For example, there's a bunch of inputs here that are unnecessary, and we'll delete all of them. We're just going to leave the username one over here and just copy it and paste it again so that we create another one for password over here, as you can see right here. And for our, we need to change as well the names. So for example, this should be password, and this should be password. And let me see. I think this is fine, right? Oh, the placeholder, let's just change this to your password. And I think this is fine, right? We just created the 2 inputs, and there's a submit function. Oh, but we need to create an onSubmit function because Formic takes that over here. So let's just create this, const onSubmit. And it's just a simple function that is going to be called whenever we submit the form. So I think right now it's all done in the sense that we can visualize our form in our project. So you can see we have here our beautiful form where it takes a username and password. And the UI for it is exactly the same as the create post one because we're using the same IDs, as you can see right here. I don't want to change the UI. I just want to keep it the same. We'll just make some CSS changes after, but this is fine for now. Or just remembered we have to change the button saying create post. Instead of that, let's just say register like this. And this is fine. What we want to do now is we want to be able to, on the onSubmit, make the API request so that it actually inputs everything to our table, right? It makes the request. So to do that, we have to import Axios into this component. So let me say import Axios from Axios. And on the unsubmit, we have to, similar to what we did with the create post, you can get the data from the form, so all the values that the person wrote on the input directly from this function's argument. So we can say data over here, and this should get an object containing the username and password. And the username and password are the whatever you wrote inside of here. So now that we have that, what we can do is we can just come over here and say axios.post and just copy the URL that we put here on our register user. It's just this over here, and just paste it over here and pass as the body the data object, because the data object will have the same format as the one we defined inside of here. So after this is done, we just want to say .then, and let's just say after this is done, we just want to, I don't know, maybe console.log something. Like, let's just console log the data to see if it's working. But basically all we're doing is this function should be called whenever we submit the form, so whenever we click on this button, and it should make the API request to this URL, which then sends the data, which is the values from the inputs. And after the data is like sent, we should just console log it just to see if it's working. But let's test it right now. You can see that in our users table we only have one user. So let's try to add another user. Let's create Michael Scott. And let's say that the password will be, I don't know, actually let me just make it so that it's together and there's no capital letters. Oh no, that's fine. Okay, Michael Scott. And the password will be, I don't know, Jim12345, something like this. And we click on register. What should happen is in our console log, it should say, I don't know, success. It says an object, the values that we put. And now in our table, if we come over here, there should be a Michael Scott. As you can see right here, it's working perfectly, and Jim12345 now is hashed as a password, as you can see. So it means it's working perfectly, and that's great. One thing that I noticed is that this isn't being treated as a password, and we can fix that. Basically, right now it's just treating it as a normal field, but there's definitely ways to make it look like a password because it shouldn't show it, right? So to make this work is we just come here to the password field and we just pass a type inside of here, and let's just pass a type of password, and now it should be, as you can see, completely hidden, right? Because that's what you usually do. But this is perfect. We are able to register right now. Obviously we are not redirected anywhere, and we can do that later on in the series. However, right now, since we're able to make this work, all we want to do is we want to be able to also check to see if we're able to log in. So for the login, it's going to be very, very, very similar. The difference is I don't want to use Formic for this because there's no reason to, right? We're just logging in. So over here, let's just create two inputs. So an input of type text and an input of type password. And both of them are going to be used for the login. So I'm just going to create a button over here called login. And let's check to see how this looks. You can see it looks like this. It looks horrible, but again, I'll work with the CSS and show the code to you guys in the description. But basically, what we want to do is we want to be able to have some sort of function over here called login, which is going to be called whenever we click on this button. So when we say on click, we want to be able to call this function, so login. And most importantly, we want to be able to grab the data from both inputs right here. Since we're not using Formic, we have to do it ourselves. So to do that, I'm going to import from React the useState hook, useState like this. And let's create a state over here, actually two states. One is going to be called username and set username. And it's just going to be a state that is going to hold the values for the usernames we're writing on the input. And the other one will be the password. So password and set password like this, set password. And it's also going to be a string. So what we're doing is basically in our input over here, all I'll do is I'll say on change. I want to call this function, which grabs an event. And we want to set username equal to event, like event.target.value. I went over this in the previous video. Basically, we're just setting our state to be equal to whatever exists inside of our input right now. And we're going to do the same for the password, but we're going to change this to set password. And now when we write on our input, we should be getting the values from the input and setting it to the state. Which means that what we have to do now is we just have to import Axios from Axios over here at the top. And in our login function, we just want to make a request to our login route. So our login route again is over here in the login user, and we just copy the URL and we just paste it over here. And all we have to pass is some sort of object similar to the one we did before, which is just an object containing a username and a password. We don't have that object we don't have like an object called data directly made for us. So what we can do is we can just come over here and create it ourselves. So I'm gonna call it data and set it equal to an object containing a username, which is equal to the username we're passing, and a password, which is equal to the password we're passing. So now we're gonna pass data over here, like this, data. And this data, the data that is being sent is exactly this one, is the one we're writing on our inputs. So after the request is done, we just literally just want to get the response. We just want to see what is the response from the server. If the user exists, if the password and username combinations are wrong, or if we actually succeeded in logging in. So for now, let's just console log the response.data to see what exactly did we get from our server. So let's check to see if this is working. Let's open this up. Let's open our console just so that we can see it immediately. You can see nothing is over here. I'll even clear it so you guys can see. But in our inputs, let's try to pass log in with PedroTech like this. And now, and for the password, I'll pass password 123. I think that's my password, right? If I click on login, you can see it says you logged in, which means we passed the correct information. But if I pass the wrong user, it should say user does not exist. And if I pass the correct user, but the wrong password, I'll just put whatever. It should say wrong username and password combination. This works perfectly. You can see our routes are correctly connected to our front end. Yeah, it's just working. We can use the responses that we got to have some sort of visual representation of what's happening. We can also use them to determine if we logged in or not. So create some sort of state or hold the state of our application in some sort of, I don't know, some sort of storage. And yeah, that's what I plan on doing. So that's basically it for this video. If you want to check out the UI and the CSS changes that I'm going to make, they're all going to be in the code in the description, which again, as I mentioned in the previous video, I'm not going to spend time writing CSS in this tutorial series. However, if you want to check out the code for the UI, it's on the description. Just go to the GitHub repository and change the branch to episode 8, I guess. I think this is episode 8, but it's just the branch. It's already directly linked in the description. So yeah, that's basically it. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like down below and comment what you want to see next. Subscribe because I'm posting 3 times a week and I'm putting a lot of effort into this channel, so I would massively appreciate it if you guys can support me. And yeah, that's basically it. Really hope you guys enjoyed it, and I see you guys next time.